Hi there, my name is Joy Brooke Fairfield. I'm an assistant professor at Rhodes College on Chickasaw land in Memphis, Tennessee, and I'm coming at you today from Ohlone land out here in California. I'm sorry I can't be with you in person today, and thank you so much to everyone on this panel, particularly Taylor, for helping me figure out how to give it to you digitally DIY. Here we go. I'll see if I can do this in one take. My presentation today is about queer wedlock performance in pop music video. This is related to a larger work I'm doing, my book project, which is called Queer Wedlock Performance in the Age of Obergefell. So just as a reminder, Obergefell versus Hodges is the landmark civil rights legislation that gives same-sex marriage legal status across the US. It was passed 7 years ago, right about now, this summertime during 2015. And again, just quick reminder because I think the story bears retelling. Jim Obergefell and his partner John Arthur had been together for about 20 years. John was diagnosed with ALS, and then shortly before his death, the two flew from Ohio, where same-sex marriages weren't recognized, to Baltimore, Maryland, where they were able to wed on a medical flight on the tarmac and then head back home. Jim later sued after John's death to be on the death certificate, and then this case, combined with a bunch of other ones, including the right to adopt and right to military spousal benefits, ended up holding his name. My joke about it, which is not that funny, is that I hope this landmark case doesn't get overruled before we have learned to pronounce it. And as probably most of you know, Obergefell is definitely under threat right now. A month ago, we heard this from Justice Clarence Thomas, who said in future cases, we should reconsider all of this court's substantive due process precedents, including Griswold, Lawrence, and Obergefell. And this was in the concurring opinion on Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization, the case that took down Roe v. Wade. So yeah, what happens if we lose Obergefell? Not specifically because I care about marriage. Spoiler alert, I don't really that much, but what will happen to same-sex love, same-sex intimacy, minoritarian relationship norms, or just any visible possible alternative to the cis hetero-monogamy norm as a life path here in the US? What will happen to all that if Obergefell goes away? One thing that I know is that queer people are in greater physical danger the more that queerness is stigmatized and associated with the illicit or the criminal. That we're seeing that now with the grooming discourse. Visibly queer people are always in more danger than people who can sort of quote pass, and often visibly queer means gender nonconforming. So to me, part of thinking through the stigmatization of how queerness is represented in public is thinking about protecting sort of the most visibly queer amongst us. So yeah, the stakes of marriage is very high. Not necessarily because we as queer people consented to it, but because it's the terms that the civil rights effort for our lives and loves has been fought and provisionally won upon. I do wonder sometimes if we had spent the past 40 years, literally the sort of scope of my lifespan, working towards something other than marriage as the main goal for queer life, something like queer affirming housing comes to mind, or comprehensive sex education, or resisting police brutality, that classic queer request. What kind of world we'd been living in now if we hadn't pinned all our hopes on marriage? But here we are in the age of Obergefell, and we don't know how long it's going to last. By saying Age of Obergefell in the title of my book project, I'm acknowledging that I'm focusing on primarily the US American legal context, primarily English language and sort of North American media circulations, but we're also working in a time now where I sort of understand that all media is very international and intercultural, and so I'm kind of thinking through transnational and cross-cultural flows as well. What is my time period? I'm thinking about the age of Obergefell. I know that I'm going at least back to 1987, which was the date of the wedding, which was part of the LGBTQ March on Washington in 1987, and it was a protest outside of the outside of the IRS, thinking through legal concerns for a wedding, but also, of course, emotional and psychological ones. But if I'm feeling really spicy, I definitely think of that age, this age of Obergefell, as going back to sort of long processes of colonization, and at least specifically the wedding of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert in 1840, which, despite being an English affair, became a very global media affair because of the way that media representations of this wedding sort of circulated widely. Now, this was the famous white dress with a white lace dress with orange blossoms that sort of launched a thousand wedding dresses. Prior to then, white had not been the traditional or typical color for a bride, and after that, it was. And this kind of tangle of purity, nationalism, and sort of Victorian colonial gendered norms got kind of really solidified. And I certainly think of marriage law, including gay marriage legislation, as part of the kind of flow of what Scott Luria Morganson calls and Kim Tallberg calls settler sexuality. So even the queer aspect of the kind of settler marriage unit is still the sort of outgrowth of gender, sexual, and relational norms that themselves have been fully corralled by the state and church and the kind of colonial violence of those roles that they establish. It's very clear to me through most of what I've read that relational diversity, like cultural diversity, was a norm on this land in the United States prior to colonization. And I think of the kind of relational scope that we have right now for love and intimacy as being sort of similar to the kind of crops that we have on our land. They're a monoculture. We have a kind of monocultural, intimate field in the same way that we have monocultural soybeans. Not good for the earth or its people. So to that end, I like to study the kind of vast, wild, and exciting diversity of these kinds of festive, semi-legal, or extra-legal events of wedding, and specifically what I'm calling queer wedlock performance. So just to get into that term real quick, I think of wedlock performance as festive events, legal or not, that use or play with the performance score of marriage. So a wedlock performance could be legal or not. What it turns on is whether or not it's sort of utilizing that culturally familiar score and form. And I'm using wedlock and the sort of etymology of it that Elizabeth Freeman looks at in her book called The Wedding Complex, where she sort of looks into the etymology of wedlock, and instead of a lock like a latch, she finds the word like, wedlike. It used to be wedlike, which was related to the old German word for play, including like song and dance. So within the very idea of wedlock might be lodged this sort of idea of wedding as performance and wedding as a kind of play through which we make these vows. Freeman calls it pledging through playing. I sometimes call it vow play. So I'm looking at wedlock performance, these sort of arts and cultural ritual events that use the performance score of marriage. And then I'm specifically looking at queer wedlock performance, which is versions of that made by queer people towards queer ends, whatever they may be. And as I use the word queer with sort of all of the kind of sexual meanings intact, as well as its orientation away from state regulation and its sort of orientation towards what Munoz would call a kind of horizon of futurity. I also use the term queer with the idea of transness really to the forefront. I connect state-sponsored marriage normativity with the kind of hold that the binary gender dyad has on our imaginations. In other words, compliant marriages require compliant genders, so the two end up sort of enforcing one another. And one thing I find about queer wedlock performance is that it lends itself to multimedia coverage and reproduction. Tropes of weddings are very recognizable. Brides, as a kind of cultural phenomenon, seem to demand to be photographed, which is not surprising, as the contemporary image of white Western wedlock performance solidified right at the moment when image reproduction in newspapers around colonial spaces became common. So I examine the sort of media residue of queer wedlock performance to see what it can tell us about queer love and intimacy in a time when it's threatened. So just for a couple of examples, and then I'll move on to my specific topic today. Just this picture, this unknown queer couple from the 20s, they're definitely doing some queer wedlock performance in their outfits alone. Here's an archival photo of an extra-legal marriage by anonymous gay men in the 1950s in a hotel room. Here's a kiss at that previously mentioned marriage activism march in Washington. Here's Del Martin and Phyllis Lyon, who embraced legally in a ceremony in San Francisco after the mayor and city clerk had found a workaround to the homophobia of the laws. And then I also look at performance art examples. So here's Annie Sprinkle and Beth Stevens' work where they use the marriage format as a way to advocate for environmental issues, like this one at the Venice Biennale. I This is why I can't be there today with you at ATHE. I'm out with them working on a wedding to the fire in fire country in Northern California. And then I also look at contemporary drag and queer performance specifically that challenges human exceptionalism through the wedding format, like this amazing piece by Bay Area artist Silkworm, who married a swarm of bees. So overall, yeah, in the book, I look at how queer and trans artists and activists use this score in order not just to validate extra-legal relationships that might not be noticed by the state, but to in fact challenge the underlying colonial and racial and gender norms that undergird some of the more violent aspects of the state and religious-sponsored concepts of marriage. So today I'm going to talk specifically about queer wedlock performance in pop music video culture, and specifically how it landed in media and in fandom. I'm specifically talking about two things. One is a live performance at the VMAs back in 2003. This was a performance by Britney, Madonna, Christina Aguilera, and Missy Elliott, famous for their kiss lodged into this kind of queer wedlock performance. And then the recent example I'm looking at is Lil Nas X and his music video for That's What I Want, which was released September 17th in 2021 to 2.6 million viewers. Now, I'm not arguing for cause and effect in these kinds of wedding performances, saying that they had any specific effect on the legislative life of marriage in this nation. Media representation, as we all know, is not synonymous with power, but it can be what Raina Gossett and others call a sort of trapdoor into power and representation. So I want to look at how these artists use the wedding form as a kind of trapdoor to hail a queer affirming audience across many different media platforms. Um, Again, I often write about live events, and these two are media recorded. A wedding is a notoriously live event, and I do think that the liveness of the VMAs being performed sort of in front of a studio audience made a huge deal, as I'll talk more later about. A wedding is performative in any sense of the word. If you're using performative in the way that J.L. Austin talked about it, a wedding definitely transforms real world conditions. It's one of his primary examples. And then in more common usage as well, the idea of something performative being kind of stagey or full of props and costumes. A wedding is also that. It has this kind of element of hyper theatricality to it. Now, again, I'm not saying that queer wedlock performance in pop media make LGBTQ relationships suddenly pop or make move forward on the general acceptance of same-sex love and support and care in the world, but I see these weddings as cultural objects that invite a kind of community resonance. In the cases of these artists, these performances activated fan bases, generated a wide amount of discourse, one on TV and the other on in social media, in part specifically through the way that marriage ceremonies conjure the participation of witnesses. So these performances sort of conjured their audience, interpolated their audience into the kind of role of witness, which comes with it sort of spiritual, psychological, and social duties that you are invited to pick up and take up if you're interested in it. Okay, I'm already running out of time, so let's go swiftly through these two examples. So it's August 28, 2003, and it's the MTV Music Video Awards. Britney Spears is at the height of her career. Before her actual marriage to her backup dancer, Kevin Federline, and the sort of tumble that she had into some health crises afterwards, she stands here as a beautiful pop bride atop a set designed to look like a wedding cake. She's singing Madonna's Like a Virgin in her breathy pop princess voice, comes down onto the stage and is joined by Christina Aguilera. In the climate of 2003, Two Brides already has queer overtones and gets even more intense as they start doing sexy dances with each other, including crawling around a little bit on the stage, as you can see here, before being joined by their groom, Madonna, who walks down in this mask classic outfit with a top hat. She has already worn bridal at the VMAs before, so she can't do it again. This time she's showing up as the groom to these younger women artists. After dancing a bit with both of the stars, she ends up leaning over and kissing Britney in this world-famous kiss, then leaning over a second later to kiss Christina Aguilera. The kiss with Christina was less famous because they had to cut away from the stage in the live video broadcast to see the response video to Justin Timberlake and how he would react to getting to seeing his ex Britney kiss Madonna. So in that sort of cutaway, they lost Christina Aguilera, so she sort of got left out of the brouhaha, for better or worse. Shortly after that, the three women are joined by another groom, Missy Elliott, who comes out of a stage-left wedding chapel singing a few lines of her classic song, Work It, and then the women dance together in a kind of sort of queer-baiting, flirtatious, but very girl power way, and they all end to wild applause. Now, this performance was one of the queerest things that had happened at the VMAs in terms of the sort of femme same-sex exploration that was happening on stage, and as such is meaningful and memorable. But of course, it's also been critiqued. This is commercialization and commodification of literally the most patriarchal approved form of homosexuality, which is beautiful women being sexual with one another for the watching eyes of straight people without perhaps any underlying devotion or eros underneath it, though both Christina and Britney said that they enjoyed the kiss with Madonna. I think we can think about how it falls in history, though, to understand, some of the significance of the kiss. So here's our general trend of approval for same-sex marriage, and right there where the red line is in 2003 is where this video took place. You're hovering at around 40% general support for U.S. same-sex marriage. There we are now, at hopefully above 70 now. So who in that audience at home or of the 10 million abroad might have sort of shifted? We don't know, it's immeasurable, but times were beginning to change and the discourse was beginning to circulate in the media sphere. Here's another time scale. This is a timeline of same-sex marriage. It's missing some things. I'm sorry, I stole it from the internet. It's missing some of the earlier stuff with Hawaii and some of the city-based legislation. But once again, there's that red line. And, here was this performance piece happening before the sort of state-by-state rollout of same-sex wedding permission was granted by legislators. So of course, I generally think of this as a kind of queer ally pageant. It was not actually made or engineered primarily by queer people. Madonna's goal was to be edgy. Britney and Christina were sort of playing along to the score set by Madonna. I'm still not quite sure how they were able to get Missy Elliott in on it. Her sexuality is certainly more complicated. She's been known to date women as well as men, though she's never come on the record as being under the LGBTQ umbrella. This is the same for Christina Aguilera. There's some discussion about her dating women, but she has not sort of come out publicly on any of her biographical sites. Yeah, so I as we understand Missy to be part of this, she was like not included in this whole kissing section, right? That was before she came on stage, and I think we can understand, Christina Aguilera is Latinx certainly, but we can understand Missy as a Black woman whose sort of sexuality has been stigmatized and policed more intensely throughout her whole life to sort of opt out of the public kissing moment as a kind of reminder that the politics of visibility are not equal and that there are different costs as we do different sort of stunts, as this was seen for visible practices. So a lot has changed since then. I don't think we should give Britney or Madonna particular credit for pushing forward same-sex marriage, but it is interesting that in the following year, it's women again doing the queer wedlock performance, this time of the legal variety. So in the next year, 2004, we saw here were two sort of major first same-sex weddings to transpire, one in San Francisco, as previously mentioned, and one in Cambridge, Massachusetts. These were the two sort of first women to get married, to kiss, or as we see in the phrase on the picture on the left, at least to sort of embrace. This is very different than pop. This is the sort of real world manifestation of the sort of pop princess dream, fever dream we were given. And I wonder to what degree we can think of that performance as being helpful or in some way sort of hindering the sort of reality that was to come after it. That performance was very different from the recent one by Lil Nas X that we're discussing today, which it was released on September 17th. Going through it real quickly, the story of this music video is Lil Nas X, seen here on the left, as a football player, falling in love with his fellow football player. It's high school, college, it seems. They start dating. Oops. Let's go back. They start dating. They go on a Brokeback Mountain themed camping date together. I'm doing some queer camping in my colleague's background right now, so I empathize. He goes over to see him at his house, only to find that his crush has a wife and children. His crush has been either lying to him or hiding some elements of his bisexual life. Lil Nas X somehow goes to the chapel anyway to get married instead of getting married to this beautiful man. He's given a guitar by Billy Porter, and he sings a song about his own loneliness. The lyrics are, "I need someone to love me. Don't feel right when it's late at night and it's just me and my dreams. I need someone to love me." Um, he ends with this, "I make up running, crying, saying that's what I fucking want." This video seems to say very clearly that gay marriage doesn't actually bring happiness to many young queer people, particularly multiply marginalized folks like Lil Nas X, being queer, Black, and from the South represent. The truth is that legal partnership for adults doesn't mean much if you can't make it to adulthood. Lil Nas X has written songs about mental health struggles he had with his queerness as a teen. The truth is if your beloved isn't gay too or isn't out, you can be up shit creek without a paddle. Now, even though representational politics aren't everything, the representation here makes a big difference. This piece of art was generated by queer creatives, not only Lil Nas X, but the group of people that he surrounds himself with. Even the kiss, even the on-screen kiss is a little bit deeper. The thing with Britney and Madonna, they weren't kissing a lot. In fact, Britney joked at her recent marriage that she got to kiss Britney for the second time. So they weren't kissing outside of filming. But Lil Nas X and his co-star had been doing quite a lot of kissing. Here's their public kiss timeline. So this video is released September 17th, probably being shot in August, maybe. But they had already kissed. They'd already kissed at the BET Awards on June 28th. Apparently, Madonna tweeted after this, hashtag did it first, and circulated a picture of her with Britney and Christina. They'd also kissed, done a lick on the neck at the SNL show a couple of months prior to that. Let's see. They also kissed again a bit later in the taping of a fake Maury Povich episode that loosely followed the story of the music video. So there's it there. There's some snapshots from the Maury show. This was a sort of this was sort of intended to mystify the fans. Is it real or is it not real? And it loosely followed the same story of the music video with the Ice character admitting to being married, but still loving Lil Nas X. They also, and this is just a little bit of gossip to end my presentation on, they also were actually dating. There's a sort of beginning of their relationship somewhere there in July, end of their relationship somewhere there in August. Their fans are still sad that they are no longer together. Here's a little fan collage made literally yesterday by someone who said, I'm not going to lie, I love these two together, even though they broke up sometime last year. People saying that they hope he seems like a real sweetheart and that they've stayed friends. From his perspective, Lil Nas X says, yes, I love him to death. He's the best. This was the most serious relationship I've ever had. And when asked why they broke up, he said, I've been wanting someone for so long and wanting somebody to love for so long, but it's a real responsibility. So essentially, Lil Nas chose his career over a relationship. Which is something that is so normal especially for 22-year-olds to do. I think what I love about this is that he was telling his fans and very open and honest with his same-sex relationship story, which is so new to be able to have that kind of vulnerable openness and fluidity with your audience. Of course, he's being strategic, but he is sharing from himself and from his sort of core life about his queer experience in the world. So part of my argument here is that through his multi-platform conversations on Twitter, on Instagram, TikTok, and other new media sites, Lil Nas X showcases and shares the sometimes difficult experiences of being queer and Black through his trademark Gen X self-deprecating humor, building empathy and laughing with his public. The effects of these network performances of vulnerability on stage, television, Twitter, TikTok, and the endless replay of YouTube are quite different than the effects that Britney and Madonna were able to have, and provide a kind of opportunity for building alternative intimate futures through the kind of Black queer rhizomatic mutuality that Jafari S. Allen theorizes. So as I let you go, let me just give you a couple of Jafari quotes. The first one is that the Black queer rhizome is generative as it inspires connections beyond a staid linear genealogy. He's referencing, of course, this idea of rhizomatic growth from Deleuze and Guattari, which is non-hierarchical and sort of reaches across disciplines. He also says that the children are seizing the worldwide stage and that the internet provides, and they are turning civil rights song into a vogue. I see that lineage of Vogue and queer creativity in the online interdisciplinary media play that Lil Nas X is doing. I think that these words here aptly describe his performance career through which he's advocating and agitating for Black queer sexual liberation beyond just the confines of marriage. And back to this concept of wedlock as vow play or pledging by playing. One of the best things about Lil Nas X is his sense of playfulness. He's showing us that great pleasure can be taken in queer intimacy, even if it doesn't last like marriage wants it to. At the end of the video, he essentially promises us, his viewers, his fans, that he will be true to us, even without a kind of main squeeze on his arm. He'll keep making music for us, strumming his guitar at the altar, even if he's alone. And of course, he's never quite alone because he has, for better or worse, the whole internet. Thank you so much, and I appreciate the time you've given me today. Bye-bye.